He took his daughter to a diner just like every quiet Sunday. But when she looked across the room and ran toward a stranger, calling her Mom, everything he buried came rushing back. If this moment stirred something in you, take a second to like the video and subscribe. These stories aren't just fiction. They're what healing sounds like rain had been falling since before dawn. A slow, persistent drizzle that soaked into the bones and silenced the town. By the time Ethan Harper pulled open the glass door of Maybelle's diner, his flannel collar was damp, and his 5-year-old daughter Lila was shivering beneath his coat sleeve. Inside, the diner was all soft lamplight and warmth. The smell of buttered toast and fresh brewed coffee wrapped around Ethan like a blanket he hadn't realized he needed. He guided Lila to their usual booth near the window, where a dusty view of Main Street flickered behind beads of rain. She clambered up onto the vinyl seat with a practiced hop, clutching her sketchbook like a treasure. "You want the usual?" he asked, brushing wet curls from her forehead. "Banana pancakes," she said, nodding solemnly. "With extra syrup, please." Ethan gave the waitress a tired smile. "1 pancake deluxe for the lady," he murmured, "and coffee for the old man." Lila was already coloring, her pencil scratched against the page, slow and careful. Ethan caught a glimpse, another family picture. 3 stick figures, a tall man, a small girl, and a woman with yellow hair and a blue dress. He felt the familiar sting behind his ribs. "That's Mom?" Lila didn't look up. "I dreamed about her again. She was smiling this time. She said I might see someone who looks like her today." Ethan's throat closed up. He sipped his coffee, bitter and lukewarm, and said nothing. What could he say? He couldn't bring her back. Couldn't erase the smoke, the flames, the moment the world split in half. He was still trying to live on one side of that fracture. A bell above the door chimed. Ethan didn't look. He had stopped noticing other people a long time ago. But Lila did. Her eyes drifted past the menu, past the syrup bottle, and locked onto something, or someone, across the room. Her little hand froze in mid-sketch. "Daddy," she whispered. Ethan glanced up. "What is it?" But Lila was already sliding out of the booth, sketchbook in hand. "Lila." "Wait." Too late. She darted across the diner, straight toward a woman seated alone by the far wall. The woman was mid-bite, poised over a slice of toast, when Lila skidded to a stop in front of her. Ethan was already on his feet when it happened. "Mom!" Lila cried, holding up the sketchbook like a banner. The entire diner fell quiet. Even the coffee machine hissed to a stop. The woman blinked. Her toast slipped back onto the plate. She stared down at the little girl in front of her, wide-eyed and speechless. Ethan reached them in seconds. His heart thundered. His coat clung to him like a second skin. And then he saw her, Isabel Monroe. Of all the people he thought he might run into again, she was not one of them. Her face was older, yes, more defined, more polished. But it was still her. Those pale gray eyes, that careful grace, the way she tilted her chin slightly when uncertain. He knew it all. And suddenly he was 27 again, at the edge of a wedding aisle they never walked down. "I'm so sorry," Ethan said, breathless. He placed a gentle hand on Lila's shoulder. She thought you were someone else." Isabel's gaze shifted slowly from Lila to him. "Ethan," she said softly, as if the word itself surprised her. Yeah." He fumbled for words. "It's been a while." She nodded, then looked back at Lila, who was still holding up the drawing. "I think she believes you're her mother," Ethan said, voice rough. Isabel studied the picture. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for it. "Did you draw this?" she asked. Lila nodded. "That's you. I mean, not really, but you look like her. That's the dress she wears in my dreams." Isabel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Come on, sweetheart," Ethan said gently. "Let's not bother the lady." But Isabel stopped him. "It's okay," she said, barely above a whisper. "Would you Like to sit down? Ethan hesitated, for a breath, for a memory, then nodded. And just like that, three people who hadn't shared a table in a lifetime, or perhaps ever, sat together at a corner booth in a small-town diner, with rain still drumming steady on the window beside them. They didn't talk about the past, not yet. They talked about pancakes, about coloring, about the cold weather. Lila, ever earnest, leaned forward. "We have a tree behind our house," she said. "It's called the Promise Tree." Isabel tilted her head. "The what?" "It's small, just a baby tree," Lila explained. "But I tie wishes to it on paper, one every night." "What kind of wishes?" Lila shrugged. "Sometimes for snow, sometimes for a puppy, but mostly for Mom to come back, or someone kind of like her." Isabel didn't answer. Her eyes glistened, just slightly, and she reached for her coffee. Ethan watched her, every part of him tensed and uncertain, and still, somewhere under the scar tissue, something stirred, something he'd buried, something that might have had roots still. When they stood to leave, Lila hugged Isabel without asking. Just a child's heart, making space. Isabel bent down, voice soft in her ear. "Thank you for your drawing, and for your wish." Lila looked at Ethan. "Can she come see the tree, Daddy?" He opened his mouth, closed it. Then, finally, maybe. Outside, the rain had let up. But Ethan could still feel it. The storm of memory, the quiet ache of what was, and the first distant rumble of something that might be again. The house was quiet when they returned. Too quiet, as it always was. Ethan unlocked the front door, nudged it open with his shoulder, and guided Lila inside. Her damp shoes squeaked on the old wood floor. She went straight for the living room, curling into the couch with her sketchbook like nothing strange had happened that morning. But Ethan felt it, the echo of a voice he hadn't heard in a decade, the weight of a presence he had buried alongside everything else he used to believe in. Isabel Monroe. Sitting across from him like no time had passed at all, except that it had. And time had done what it always does. Softened what was sharp, blurred what was clear, and left behind a quieter ache. He took off his coat, hung it by the door. The living room smelled faintly of wood smoke and old coffee. Lila had left a stuffed rabbit on the armchair, a blanket halfway off the floor. Everything looked lived in, loved, but hollow. He walked to the kitchen and filled the kettle. The silence filled every corner. No humming. No soft footsteps in another room. No voice calling his name. That used to be Claire. He leaned against the counter, staring out the back window at the patch of yard where Lila had planted the promise tree. It stood maybe 3 feet tall, a skinny little sapling with a few stubborn leaves still clinging on despite the season. Little slips of paper fluttered from its branches, tied with bits of yarn and string. One was soggy. One was faded to white. He hadn't read them, not once. He told himself they were Lila's, private and sacred. But the truth was simpler. He was afraid of what she wished for. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. Clouds hung low over the hills, and the neighbor's wind chime whispered with every breeze. He poured hot water over a tea bag and brought it to the living room. "Daddy?" Lila's voice was quiet. "Was she really Mom?" He froze. She looked up at him, eyes wide, vulnerable. Hopeful. "No," he said gently, sitting beside her. "She just looked like her. But you know that already, don't you?" Lila nodded. "She was nice, though." "She was. Did you know her?" He hesitated. "A long time ago." Lila leaned against him. "I liked her." She smiled like someone who doesn't smile much but still means it. That made something pull tight in his chest. He wrapped an arm around her. They sat like that for a while, the old wall clock ticking steadily above them, the tea going cold in his hand. Eventually, Lila drifted to sleep, her sketchbook still open on her lap. Ethan gently lifted it, careful not to wake her, and set it aside. He stood, walked to the back door, and stepped out onto the porch. The mist brushed his face. The yard stretched out uneven and patched with late autumn grass, and there, slightly off-center, stood the little promise tree. Ethan walked toward it slowly, hands in his pockets. Each step felt heavier than the last. The tree wasn't much, but Lila had picked the spot, dug the hole herself with a pink plastic trowel, and declared it sacred. Every night she tied a new wish to it. She never told him what they said. He reached up and carefully untied one. It was written in uneven, careful print. "I wish Mom would come say hi to Dad so he smiles again." Ethan closed his eyes. He hadn't realized how tightly he was gripping the paper until his hand began to ache. He folded the note gently, tucked it back, and stared at the tree, at all the small prayers fluttering in the wind. Lila believed in something he couldn't name anymore. She believed in trees that granted wishes and women who looked like mothers and in fathers who could still smile. He used to believe in things too. Back inside, he made dinner. Grilled cheese and soup. Something easy, something familiar. Lila woke just in time to eat, and she was quieter than usual, like her mind was still in the diner. After she went to bed, Ethan sat in the dark for a long time. No TV, no music. Just the creak of the house and the faint sound of leaves scratching at the window pane. He thought of Isabel. The way she'd looked at Lila, startled, then tender. The way she'd looked at him. Older, yes, but not angry, not bitter. What was she doing back in this town? And what were the odds that she'd walk into Maybelle's on the same morning he finally felt strong enough to take Lila out again? He didn't believe in fate, but he believed in timing. And this felt like something waiting for him to notice. He pulled out an old shoebox from the hall closet, one he hadn't opened in years. Inside, a photograph of Isabel at 23, sitting cross-legged on a picnic blanket. A ring in a velvet box he never gave her. A note he never sent. He read the note again, slowly, like it belonged to someone else. Then he tore it in half. Ethan went to the kitchen, refilled the kettle. While it heated, he opened the back door again and stepped onto the porch. The promise tree was still there, patient, quiet, waiting. This time, he stepped off the porch without hesitation. He crouched beside the sapling and untied a piece of blank paper from his pocket. He wrote, in small, careful letters, "If you come back, I'll try." He tied it to the lowest branch, close enough for Lila to find in the morning. Then he stood, hands still trembling slightly, and looked up into the mist, where nothing was certain, except the fact that something had shifted inside the hollow room of his chest, and it had the shape of hope. It started with thunder, not loud, not violent, just a low murmur in the sky like the earth was clearing its throat. By mid-afternoon, the clouds had thickened to bruised gray, and the rain returned with steadier purpose. Ethan stood on the porch, watching water ribbon down the driveway and pool at the edge of the old maple. His truck sat in silence, flecks of rust bleeding down the side like old wounds. He sipped lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug and told himself he wasn't waiting for anything, not for a knock, not for a car, certainly not for Isabel. But when her sedan turned onto his gravel road, tires crunching softly under wet leaves, his grip on the mug tightened. She stepped out slowly, holding her daughter's hand beneath a large black umbrella. The child wore rain boots 3 sizes too big, and clung to Isabel like she was the only steady thing left in the world. Ethan opened the screen door before they could reach it. "You're soaked," he said, a little too sharply. Isabel gave a breath of a laugh. "That's what happens when you drive through a flooded back road in a borrowed car." He stepped aside, nodded toward the hallway. "There's towels in the bathroom, the heater's on." She looked at him for a second longer than necessary. "Thank you." Her daughter followed without a word, clutching a stuffed bear to her chest. Lila, curious and wide-eyed, appeared at the top of the stairs in pajamas. "Hi," she called, softly. "Is that the girl from the diner?" Isabel's daughter looked up. "My name's Sophie." Lila tilted her head. Do you like drawing? Sophie nodded slowly. Then, you can come upstairs. I have colored pencils. Sophie looked to her mother for approval. Isabel hesitated, then gave a gentle nod. The girls disappeared together, giggling before they even reached the top step. Ethan and Isabel stood in the living room, steam rising from their damp jackets. You didn't have to come, Ethan said finally. She raised an eyebrow. You left your number on my napkin, Ethan. What was I supposed to do, file it away for sentiment? He smirked. I figured you'd toss it. I almost did. She looked around the room. But then the storm started, and I wasn't sure where else to go. You still staying with that friend in Middlebury? She shook her head. No. She moved last month. I'm in a motel off Highway 7. Not the kind of place you want to hunker down with a child during a power outage. He motioned toward the fireplace. Sit. I'll make something warm. She took a seat on the couch, Claire's old couch, and Ethan tried not to think about the ghost of his wife sitting there in the periphery. Instead, he moved to the kitchen. The fridge offered little, but he pulled together grilled cheese and tomato soup, the same comfort meal he'd made the night Claire lost the baby. But tonight was different. Tonight, someone was here. When he returned with 2 bowls, Isabel was staring at the wall above the mantel. His wedding photo was gone. He'd put it away years ago, but the empty nail still remained. She didn't ask. They ate quietly. Rain tapped at the windows like a child asking to come inside. After dinner, the power flickered, once, then twice, before cutting out completely. Ethan sighed. Well, welcome to rural Vermont. Isabel smiled faintly. I think I preferred the thunder. He moved to the hallway closet and returned with a flashlight and a few stubby candles. Soon, the room glowed with soft amber light. From upstairs came the sound of laughter. Not loud, but real. And something in Ethan's chest cracked just a little wider. You were always good with quiet, Isabel said, watching him. He paused. You were always good at avoiding it. She didn't deny it. Instead, she stood and wandered to the back door. That's it? She asked, looking through the glass. He joined her, following her gaze to the yard. The promise tree stood under. The rain, leaves trembling in the wind, paper wishes fluttering gently like prayer flags. Lila started it last spring, he said. Says it only works if the wish is for someone else. Isabel stared at the tree for a long time. What does she wish for? I don't ask, he replied. I'm afraid she might be wishing for something I can't give her. A silence settled between them, but it wasn't heavy. It wasn't bitter. It was something else. A bridge half built, waiting for the next plank. Do you want to see it up close? He asked. She nodded. He grabbed his jacket, handed her a spare, and they stepped into the mist together. The grass was cold and spongy underfoot. At the tree, Isabel reached out, gently brushing one of the paper slips. It read, I wish Sophie didn't have to be scared when the lights go out. Isabel's breath caught. Her hand dropped. She wrote that yesterday, Ethan said. Lila helped her spell it. Isabel looked up at him, her face open and raw. I didn't think anyone would. She's safe here, Ethan said simply. They stood in the rain for another minute, unmoving. Then she whispered, Why did you leave? It was barely a question, and he didn't answer right away. Instead, he said, The day I lost Claire, I lost the sound of my own voice. I couldn't hear myself anymore, couldn't hear you. Her eyes welled, not in anger, not even in sadness, just recognition. I'm not here to ask you to remember anything, she said. I just didn't want to be alone tonight. Ethan nodded, voice low. You're not. And as they walked back to the house, the porch light flickered on with the generator's hum, small, warm, and stubborn, like the house itself was choosing to stay awake, just a little longer. The storm didn't break until just before dawn. The wind had calmed, The thunder rolled into the distance like a retreating drumbeat, and the rain softened to a hush, just enough to hear the ticking of the old kitchen clock again. But Ethan hadn't slept. He sat in the corner of the living room, legs stretched out, an Afghan blanket over his lap, a half-empty mug cooling beside him. The power was still out, but the fireplace gave off enough glow to cast soft gold across the hardwood floor. Across the room, Isabel slept on the couch, her daughter curled against her. They looked like two pieces of paper folded neatly into each other. Even in sleep, Isabel's arms wrapped around the child like she was afraid the storm might still reach them. Ethan turned his gaze toward the fireplace. The embers crackled softly, a conversation he almost understood. Claire used to fall asleep like that too, wrapped around Lila before she was born, as if preparing for the weight of motherhood. He closed his eyes and exhaled through his nose. Floorboard creaked. When he opened his eyes, Isabel was sitting up, hair tousled, sweater falling off one shoulder. Her eyes met his across the flickering light. "Did I snore?" she whispered. He chuckled. "No worse than thunder." She rubbed her temples. "Feels like I slept 100 years and 5 minutes at the same time." He nodded toward the kitchen. "There's tea, if you're okay with slightly lukewarm." She rose carefully, tucking a blanket around Sophie, and padded into the kitchen with bare feet. He followed. They stood at opposite ends of the counter like people who used to share something sacred but now tiptoed around its remnants. She sipped the tea. "You didn't change the kitchen much." "I couldn't," Ethan said. "I started, once. But every drawer I opened felt like I was stealing from someone." She nodded. Grief has a way of putting locks on ordinary things. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she asked, "Do you still cook?" He half smiled. "For Lila. Not like I used to. Haven't touched a menu since. Everything." "You were good," she said. "Better than you thought you were." He looked down. "That life, it feels like it belonged to someone else." Isabel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Her voice lowered. "Can I ask something personal?" Ethan nodded once. "Did you hate me for leaving?" His eyes met hers. The truth hovered between them, quiet and raw. "I didn't hate you," he said slowly. "I hated how much it still hurt that you left. Even after everything else broke." Isabel looked down at the cup in her hands. "I wasn't strong enough back then. I told myself I was being practical, choosing safety. But really, I was just scared. I saw you disappearing into your grief, and I didn't know how to reach you without falling in too." The room felt full of ghosts, not angry ones, just tired, familiar. "I always thought," he began, then stopped. "I always thought if I could just hold it all together long enough, you'd come back." She blinked, tears shining in her eyes. "I almost did, twice. Once in the middle of the night, I even parked outside, but I saw the lights off and I was too much of a coward to knock." "You weren't a coward," Ethan said. "You just survived in a different direction than I did." They stood like that for a long moment, the distance between them more emotional than physical. Then softly, Isabel said, "My marriage didn't last long. He was a mistake, but I stayed until I couldn't anymore. Sophie was the only good thing I got out of it." Ethan looked toward the staircase, where both girls were asleep. "She's kind," he said. "Like you." "I worry about what?" "She remembers," Isabel said. "She doesn't say much, but she flinches when someone closes a door too hard. She watches people's hands. I hate that she learned to be afraid before she learned to ride a bike." Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not pity, but recognition. They were both parents carrying guilt, quietly hoping love was enough to outpace the damage. He stepped around the counter and gently placed another log in the fireplace. The flame caught, danced higher. Behind him, Isabel asked, "Do you remember the day we almost bought that little blue house on Maple Street?" He nodded. "You wanted the window seat, I wanted the backyard. And we both forgot the checkbook." She smiled, bittersweet. It's strange how you remember the soft parts. Maybe the soft parts are all that matter, Ethan said. They both sat on the floor now, backs against the couch, knees barely touching. A candle flickered beside them, casting long shadows on the wall. You were the first person who made me feel seen, she whispered. And then the first person I truly let down. He turned to her, eyes steady. You didn't let me down, life did, grief did. I did. She reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out a slip of paper, folded, a little crumpled. I wrote a wish, she said, for the promise tree. I didn't know if it was allowed. Ethan smiled. There aren't rules. She handed it to him. He opened it. I wish it wasn't too late to start again. He read it twice. Then once more, just to be sure the words were real. I don't know if wishes come true, he said. I don't either, she replied. But I'd like to believe, he added quietly, just a little. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and in that dim, warm space, with 2 sleeping children upstairs and rain still tracing lines across the windows, neither of them spoke again for a very long time. Because sometimes the things we never say are the things that keep us here. Together. The sun returned 2 days later. It rose slowly over the ridge, brushing the maple trees in gold, melting the last puddles along the porch steps. Ethan stood outside with a cup of coffee, squinting into the light like it was something he hadn't earned. Behind him, laughter floated from the kitchen, 2 girls at the table, trading colored pencils and crumbs from cinnamon toast. He leaned against the porch rail, listening. The house sounded different now, less hollow, less like a room pretending not to miss someone. Even the floorboards creaked differently, like they were carrying more life than before. Inside, Isabel was humming, something low and tuneless, as she rinsed out mugs and reached for a towel. She wore one of Claire's old flannel shirts, over leggings, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, hair tied in a loose knot. Ethan didn't say anything about the shirt. It looked like it belonged to her. He stepped inside, still cradling the warmth of the mug. You're up early. Isabel turned, flashing him a soft smile. Old habit. Sophie was always an early riser. The quiet makes her feel safe. Lila looked up from her drawing. We're making a menu for our pretend bakery. Sophie's in charge of chocolate things. Sophie nodded, solemn as a judge. All the chocolate. Ethan chuckled. Sounds like a very successful business model. They finished breakfast together, and for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like the day was something to survive. It simply stretched out before him, full of small plans. He fixed a loose step on the porch. Isabel helped him clear leaves from the gutter. The girls planted daffodil bulbs in the side yard, giggling every time they got more dirt on themselves than in the holes. In the afternoon, Isabel found a box of old board games in the hall closet, and they played Uno by the fire while rain threatened in the distance but never quite returned. Everything was simple. Everything was soft. That night, as the girls drifted off in the same bed, legs tangled, Sophie's bear wedged between them, Ethan stood outside with Isabel under a starlit sky. The yard smelled like wet earth and wood smoke. The promise tree swayed gently in the breeze, paper wishes fluttering like tiny flags of hope. She asked me if she could stay, Isabel said quietly. Ethan glanced at her. Sophie? She nodded, just for a while. Until things feel normal. He hesitated. And you? Isabel didn't answer right away. I don't know. It's peaceful here. Sophie sleeps through the night. Lila smiles like someone who doesn't carry too much. Yet Ethan swallowed. You don't owe me anything. I know, she said. That's why I might stay. She touched his arm, just lightly, and went inside. He remained on the porch long after the door closed, watching the wind tug at the tree, until even the wishes seemed to breathe. The days that followed settled into something Ethan hadn't Dared imagine. Routine. Isabel took over the kitchen like she'd always belonged there, flipping pancakes, humming softly, organizing spices alphabetically. Ethan rediscovered old joys, chopping vegetables, kneading dough, explaining to two very curious girls why baking soda mattered. They built things, a new shelf in the laundry room, a scarecrow for the garden. Isabel helped Lila repaint her old dresser. Ethan patched a screen window with more care than it probably deserved. They started saying things like we and let's and maybe next weekend. The town began to notice. At the farmer's market, Sheriff Dalton gave Sophie a lollipop and nodded toward Isabel like she was already one of them. Mrs. Greeley from the bakery asked if Ethan was seeing someone new and winked before he could respond. He didn't correct her. That Saturday, the girls joined the local library's story hour. Isabel offered to help repaint the community center's kitchen. Ethan dropped off a box of canned goods to the town pantry for the first time in years. And through it all, the tree behind the house kept catching wishes. They added new strings, red, green, even sparkly ones. Some of the notes weren't even from the girls anymore. Isabel tied one after a long phone call and didn't say what it was. Ethan wrote one and burned it the next morning before anyone saw. But one evening, Lila showed him hers before tying it up. I wish we could stay like this, even if it's not forever. He read it twice, then bent down and kissed the top of her head. Me too, he whispered. 1 week turned into 2. And somewhere in the second week, Ethan began to hope, really hope, that maybe the tree had worked. That maybe peace was something you could build with your hands, not something that came like a reward. Until the knock came. Late one afternoon, as Ethan sanded a corner of the old porch railing and Isabel folded laundry in the living room, there was a knock on the door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. He looked up. Isabel froze. She set the laundry down, her face already pale. Ethan crossed to the front door and opened it. Cautiously. A man stood on the steps, tall, neatly dressed, cold eyes. I'm looking for Isabel Monroe, he said. Ethan didn't answer right away. The weight of the man's presence chilled the air around them. Who's asking? The man tilted his head. Thomas, her husband. Behind him, Isabel's breath caught, a quiet, trembling sound. Sophie's footsteps thumped down the stairs. The moment cracked like glass. And the brief season of peace ended, not with a storm, but with a name. Ethan hadn't moved from the doorway. Thomas Monroe stood beneath the porch awning, one hand in the pocket of a tailored wool coat, the other holding a sleek black umbrella. His shoes were spotless, his tie uncreased. Not a man who'd driven through mud or climbed broken stairs. He didn't belong in this town, or this house, or this moment. Behind Ethan, Isabel stood frozen in the hallway, one hand pressed against the wall like she needed the house to hold her up. Sophie, halfway down the stairs, looked from her mother to the man outside. Mom. Isabel's voice came out as a whisper. Go upstairs, sweetheart, please. Sophie hesitated, then climbed back up without a word. Thomas watched the exchange, eyes sharp and calculating. I see you still have a talent for dramatics, Isabel. Ethan stepped out, closing the door gently behind him. You need to leave. Thomas's eyes didn't even flicker. And you are? Someone who gives a damn. Thomas smiled, tight, joyless. Cute. But this is a legal matter. I have full custody. Your house guest is harboring a child without my consent. You can be charged for that. Ethan didn't blink. She left because you made her afraid. I made her disciplined. You made her disappear. Thomas's jaw tightened. You don't know the first thing about our life. Ethan took a step closer. I know enough. Thomas exhaled, controlled. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to collect what belongs to me. The word hung in the air like a foul stench. Ethan's voice dropped. She's not a suitcase, and she doesn't belong to you. A flash of something, fury, maybe, sparked behind Thomas's eyes. I don't think you understand the consequences of getting involved. Ethan didn't flinch. I've lived through worse. He turned, opened the door just enough to slip back inside and locked it behind him. Isabel stood in the hallway, arms crossed tightly over her chest, shoulders rigid. Her face was pale but dry. "He found us," she said. Ethan nodded. "For now." Isabel looked toward the stairs. "She's going to panic. We'll keep her calm, 1 hour at a time. I don't know if I can do this again." Ethan's voice softened. "You're not doing it alone." She looked at him then, really looked, and something shifted between them. A silent thread pulled taut. Not a promise, not yet, but something steadier than fear. The sheriff came by just before sunset. Ethan had made the call after Thomas drove off, leaving behind a business card that felt more like a threat than a courtesy. Sheriff Dalton, a solid man with crow's feet and calm eyes, sipped black coffee at the kitchen table while Isabel sat across from him, pale and composed. "Technically," he said, "if he has full legal custody, things get messy. But Vermont law takes allegations of abuse seriously. If you file, we can issue a temporary protective order. It won't stop him from trying other ways, but it gives us ground to keep him out of town for now." Isabel nodded, fingers wrapped tight around the mug Ethan had made her. "I'll file." Sheriff Dalton looked to Ethan. "You okay with them staying here a little longer?" Ethan didn't even hesitate. "As long as they need." The sheriff left not long after, promising to return in the morning with paperwork. That night, Ethan sat on the porch long after the girls had gone to bed. Isabel stepped out beside him, blanket draped over her shoulders. "I should have told you," she said. Ethan shook his head. "You told me what mattered. I didn't want to bring danger here." "You didn't, he did." They sat in silence, the wind rustling the leaves of the promise tree. One of the paper wishes had fallen to the ground, caught on the porch steps. Ethan bent down, picked it up, and handed it to her. It wasn't hers. It wasn't Lila's. It was Sophie's, scrawled in crooked letters. "I wish he would forget us." Isabel's eyes shimmered. "She shouldn't have to be that brave." Ethan looked at her. "Neither should you." He stood, pulled the porch blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I meant what I said," he told her. "You're not alone." Isabel looked up at him, voice trembling but steady. "And if he comes back?" Ethan didn't look away. "Then he'll meet someone who doesn't back down anymore." The next morning, the town responded. Word spread, as it always did. Mrs. Greeley dropped off a tray of muffins and a flashlight, just in case. Sheriff Dalton brought by the protective order, stamped and signed. Even Tom, the carpenter, from the hardware store, stopped by to check Ethan's door locks. By noon, Isabel and Sophie weren't just strangers anymore. They were names people cared about, faces the town remembered, and still the tension hummed underneath. Ethan felt it in every creak of the porch, every car that passed too slow, every shadow stretched long across the lawn. The fear was back, not loud, but real. But so was the quiet resolve. The slow fortification of something he hadn't felt in years. Not just the instinct to protect, but the choice to stay and fight. That night, as they stood beneath the porch light, Isabel looked at him and whispered, "You didn't have to. Open the door for us." Ethan shook his head. "Maybe not." She stepped closer. "But you did." Their hands brushed, tentative, and for the first time neither of them pulled away. The rain came fast. 1 minute, the sky was a patchwork of fading gold and ash. The next, it cracked open, sudden, full, cold. A storm, without warning. Ethan heard the first slap of water against the windows while he was tightening the back door lock. His hands slick with sweat and oil. It was nearly dusk. The house was quiet but not peaceful. Tension had settled into the corners like dust. Isabel was upstairs helping Sophie finish her homework. Lila curled beside her with a picture book. Ethan had checked the locks twice, maybe 3 times. Every creak made his heart twitch. Every flash of headlights out on the road brought him to the window. He kept telling himself the sheriff's order would hold, that Thomas would think twice, that people like him didn't like scenes, didn't like messes, but monsters didn't always knock. Sometimes they kicked the door in, and just after night fell, he did. The sound was unmistakable, a hard fist slamming the front door, again, and again. 3 sharp bangs. Ethan froze. Then Isabel screamed. He moved. Fast. Down the stairs through the narrow hall, just in time to catch Thomas's shadow beyond the glass, soaked, furious, his voice muffled but rising. "Open the damn door, Isabel." Ethan reached for the deadbolt. Isabel was beside him now, trembling. "He can't come in," she whispered. "The order." Ethan placed a hand on her arm. "He won't." But the door rattled, and then silence. For 3 long seconds, nothing. Then came the sound of feet circling the house. A moment later, glass shattered in the back. Ethan turned. Isabel gasped. He ran. The back door was ajar. A kitchen window had burst inward, a chair still teetering where it had been thrown through. Rain sprayed across, the floor like a broken faucet, and Thomas stood inside, his eyes locked on Isabel. "Pack her bag," he said coldly. "Now!" Sophie was clinging to the stair rail, wide-eyed. Lila stepped out behind her, confused, scared. Ethan positioned himself between Thomas and the girls, breathing hard, fists clenched. "You need to leave," he said. "This doesn't concern you." "It does now," Thomas scoffed. "You're just a washed-up charity case playing house." Ethan stepped forward. "Say what you want about me, but you don't raise your voice in this house. You don't scare little girls here. You don't win." Thomas took another step in. Ethan didn't move. His voice dropped, steel under gravel. "If you want to hurt someone, you're going through me." Rain poured through the broken window behind Thomas. Thunder cracked like bone. The whole house seemed to be holding its breath. Thomas's mouth curled. He lunged. The punch landed in Ethan's shoulder. Pain lit up his arm. He stumbled but didn't fall. He surged back, shoving Thomas into the counter. A lamp shattered. The girls screamed. "Get upstairs!" Ethan yelled. Isabel pulled both children back, her body a shield, her voice barely holding together. Thomas swung again. Ethan ducked, barely, and tackled him into the pantry door. The old wood cracked. The storm howled through the house, and then finally, red and blue lights cut through the trees. Sheriff Dalton burst through the front with 2 deputies, weapons drawn but unneeded. Thomas froze. It was over in less than a minute. Cuffs, rights read. A furious stream of protest swallowed by sirens, and then silence again. Except for the rain. Ethan sat on the porch steps, soaked through, a towel half wrapped around his neck. His knuckles throbbed, his ribs ached. A bruise was already blooming along his cheekbone, but he was upright, breathing, intact. He looked up as Isabel stepped outside. She was barefoot, still shaking slightly, a blanket clutched around her shoulders. She sank down beside him. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "Yes, I did." She touched his face, fingers feather-light against the swelling, and her eyes filled again. "I was afraid. If I came here, I'd bring the storm with me." Ethan looked at her. Rain still streaked across the porch roof. The wind still bent the trees. "Maybe you did," he said softly. "But this house needed the rain." They sat in silence. Then the door creaked open. Sophie appeared, her stuffed bear clutched tight. Lila followed, blinking. Sophie stepped toward Ethan. "Are you hurt?" He nodded once. "A little." Sophie looked at her mother. "Are we going to have to leave again?" Isabel didn't answer. So Ethan did. He opened his arms. "Not tonight." Both girls moved toward him, one on each side, their small frames pressing against him like anchors. He felt the warmth of them, the weight, the impossible aching relief. And as Isabel sat beside them, her hand finding his in the dark, Ethan realized something. The storm had come, and he had not run. Not this time. Later that night, After the deputies had gone and the girls had fallen asleep curled together on the couch, Isabel returned from the kitchen carrying a single slip of paper. She opened the back door and stepped out barefoot. Into the cold grass, Ethan followed her, a flashlight in hand. She knelt beneath the promise tree, reached up and tied the paper carefully, her hands steady now. Ethan stepped closer. "What did you wish for?" he asked. Isabel looked up at him, eyes clear. "I didn't wish," she said. "I thanked it. It happened at 3:17 a.m. The smoke alarm shrieked first, sharp, inhuman. Ethan bolted upright, heart hammering. For a split second, he didn't recognize the sound. Then came the smell. Acrid, thick, smoke, black and fast. He was on his feet before thought caught up. "Isabel," he shouted, coughing as he yanked open the bedroom door. "Get the girls." Flames licked the hallway ceiling, orange and alive. Heat slammed into him. The floorboards beneath his bare feet burned hot. Isabel emerged from the girls' room, both children clutched in her arms. Lila was sobbing. Sophie was silent, frozen. "This way," he barked, taking Sophie into his arms, pulling them all toward the staircase. The smoke grew thicker, swallowing every corner of the house Ethan had begun to believe in again. He felt the promise of it crumbling, piece by piece, under each step. Outside, the cold was cruel against his burning skin. They stood barefoot in the grass, coughing, shaking. The house behind them lit the night like a pyre. Someone must have seen the flames. The fire truck arrived fast, but not fast enough. Ethan watched as water blasted through shattered windows, as firemen shouted, as neighbors gathered in pajamas and robes, hands over mouths, helpless. The porch collapsed, then the kitchen roof, and just beyond the fence line, lit by flame and sirens, the promise tree, still standing, but scorched. Its leaves burned. Its wishes ash. Later, the fire chief handed him the report. Arson. Accelerant used. Back porch. Intentional. Thomas, but no proof. No camera. No witness. Just ruin. They were given cots at the town community center. Clean blankets. Soup. Isabel sat, curled with the girls on a mattress in the corner, whispering lullabies through cracked lips. Her eyes were wide open, even in the dark. Ethan sat by the window, elbows on his knees, watching the horizon. He hadn't said a word in hours. His hands still smelled like smoke. His jeans were scorched at the knees. His voice, gone. The only thing he could hear now was the sound of Sophie's wish, burned from the promise tree, echoing somewhere in his mind. "I wish he would forget us." But no one had. The next morning, the town came. Mrs. Greeley brought fresh bread. Sheriff Dalton returned with coffee and a hand on Ethan's shoulder. The librarian dropped off toys. Someone offered their guest house. Someone else offered a job. But Ethan couldn't speak. He walked the field behind the house that no longer stood. The grass was black. Charred pieces of door frames stuck from the ground like bones. And there, at the edge, stood what was left of the promise tree. Its trunk was cracked, one side blackened, most of its branches gone. Only one paper tag remained, half burned, unreadable. Ethan dropped to his knees in front of it. Everything he'd rebuilt, carefully, slowly, was gone. And he was tired. God, he was tired. He didn't hear Isabel approach. Didn't know she was there until he felt her hand in his. She crouched beside him. "Don't let this be the end," she whispered. "Not again." He looked at her, his voice cracked. "I tried, Izzy, I really tried." "I know. But it's all gone." "No," she said. "The walls are gone. The beds, the pictures. But not all." He stared at the ground. "Then, what's left?" She looked down at their joined hands. "This," she said. "And them," she added, glancing back at the girls sitting cross-legged in the grass, making daisy chains from weeds and laughing like nothing had burned. Ethan followed, her gaze. He watched Lila lean her head on Sophie's shoulder. Sophie wiped soot from her sleeve and offered Lila her bear. They had no house, no tree, no bedroom, but they were still here, still together, and that, somehow, was more than ashes. That evening, Ethan went to the ruins of the kitchen and found the metal box where Lila kept her drawing supplies. The lid was scorched, warped, but inside, miraculously, her sketchbook had survived. He opened it, pages charred at the corners, but one drawing remained untouched. 3 people, a man, a woman, and 2 little girls standing beside a tree, and underneath we stayed. He brought it to Isabel. She cried. Then quietly, they walked to the edge of the yard. He dug a hole with his hands. The earth was warm from fire, but soft beneath. He planted a new sapling, just a baby. Straight, fragile. He tied a ribbon around its tiny trunk. Too soon? He asked. Isabel shook her head. No, just in time. Together, they tied the first new wish, written in Lila's scrawl. Let's grow again. It started with a ladder, rusty, paint-chipped, and leaning against the side of a pickup truck that had seen better decades. It showed up on a Wednesday morning, parked just off the blackened outline of what used to be Ethan's front porch. Tom Delaney, the town's unofficial handyman, stood beside it. He was chewing a toothpick and wearing his usual trucker hat pulled low over grizzled eyes. He didn't knock, didn't ask. He just called out, "You still got a hammer?" Ethan blinked at him, bleary from a poor night's sleep and too many dreams of fire. Somewhere. Find it. We got work to do. And that was how it began. By noon, 3 more trucks had pulled into the yard. People climbed out holding toolboxes, bags of nails, boxes of shingles. Mrs. Greeley brought lunch for everyone, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and a thermos of soup. The librarian delivered a tarp to keep the new lumber dry. No speeches, no fanfare, just neighbors, showing up, because that's what small towns do when one of their own is hit by something too big to carry alone. And somewhere between the hammering and the coffee refills, Ethan's hands remembered. The old rhythms, the weight of rebuilding, the discipline of shaping something steady from pieces that didn't look like they'd ever fit again. Isabel joined in, sleeves rolled up, cheeks flushed from the wind. She painted window frames with quiet determination. Sophie carried tools back and forth in a red wagon. Lila gathered wildflowers and placed them in mason jars around the yard like they were guarding sacred ground. Ethan stepped back once, sweaty, breathless, and saw it all from a distance. It didn't look like a house yet, but it looked like hope. Over the next week, the frame went up, then the roof. By the 10th day, the inside walls were rough but standing. Someone donated insulation. Someone else left a box of curtains on the porch, lavender and soft like the ones Claire used to love. Each night, the family returned to the temporary cottage Sheriff Dalton had secured. It had only 2 bedrooms, slanted floors, and a wood stove that wheezed with effort. But it was warm, and the girls fell asleep quickly, limbs tangled like vines. One night, Ethan stood outside the cottage staring up at the sky, clear and clean, and felt something lift off his chest. Not all the way, not forever, but enough. On the 12th morning, he walked alone to the edge of the yard where the new sapling stood, the second promise tree. It was taller than when he'd planted. It's still fragile, still thin, but its leaves had come in pale green and stubborn. Dozens of new ribbons fluttered from its branches. Most he recognized, from Lila, from Sophie, from Isabel, but others were new. Different handwriting, wishes written by strangers. Please, help my sister find peace. Let my son come home. Don't let them lose this house again. Ethan stood still for a long time, the wind wrapping around him like a whispered prayer. People had believed. In the tree, in the family, in the rebuild, in him. Later that day, Sheriff Dalton arrived with papers tucked into a leather folder. You're going to want to sign these, he said. Makes everything official. What is it? Ethan asked. Dalton opened the folder. Deed. Transfer, he said. This lot's yours now. Debt's cleared. Town council voted last night. Ethan stared at the paper. I can't. Dalton raised a hand. You didn't ask for it. You earned it. Ethan felt the weight of those words settle deep into his chest. Not like a burden, like roots. He signed, with a hand that no longer shook. That weekend, they held a small gathering, just a potluck and folding chairs in the new front yard. Lila played hopscotch with Sophie. Isabel laughed more than she had in years. Ethan grilled hot dogs on a borrowed barbecue and drank lemonade from a mason jar like it was the finest wine Vermont had ever seen. When the sun dipped low, casting gold over the lawn and tree, Isabel stood beside him. You okay? She asked. Ethan nodded. Yeah, for the first time in a long time. Yeah. She leaned into him. Not tentative, not afraid. Just home. That night, after the girls fell asleep, Ethan and Isabel stood again at the promise tree. They brought one last ribbon, blank. They held it between them. Want to write something? She asked. He shook his head. You? She smiled. No. They tied it anyway. Let the wind decide. And in that moment, it didn't feel like a wish. It felt like a promise already kept. Autumn came again. It crept in gently. Soft gold light on the hills, the rustle of red leaves across the gravel drive, the distant honk of geese leaving for warmer places. The air carried that familiar Vermont chill, sharp but clean like something honest brushing against your skin. The house stood steady now, pale cedar siding, a new porch swing, a screen door that squeaked, but only a little. Inside, the walls smelled of fresh paint and morning pancakes. Sophie's shoes sat beside Lila's under the bench. Isabel's tea tin rested beside Ethan's coffee mug like they'd always belonged together. Everything was quieter these days, not empty, just whole. Ethan woke early, as he always did, and sat on the back porch with a blanket across his lap and a steaming mug between his hands. The sun was rising slow and sleepy over the tree line. Out in the yard, the promise tree shimmered with the season's first yellow leaves. It was taller now, over 6 feet. The trunk had thickened. The bark had roughened. But the ribbons still danced from its branches. New ones. Dozens of them. Some were from strangers who passed through town. Some were from children in the school Isabel helped rebuild. Some were from the 4 of them. Small, quiet prayers tied at dusk when no one was watching. Ethan smiled faintly. He wasn't sure if the tree was magic, but it was something, and in this world, something was enough. Behind him, the door creaked. Isabel stepped out, still wrapped in her robe, hair sleep-mussed, eyes soft with morning light. You started coffee without me, she murmured. He handed her his mug. I'll make another. She sat beside him on the swing. They didn't speak. Just watched the wind in the tree and listened to the house settle behind them like an old friend sighing in its sleep. A moment later, the door flew open. Lila burst out first, wearing mismatched socks and carrying a jar of buttons. Promise, tree time, she declared. Sophie followed, groggy but grinning. You said we could today. Isabel raised an eyebrow. What exactly is happening? Lila held up the jar like it was sacred. We're making a new kind of wish. Ethan leaned forward. What kind? Not just paper, Lila said. Something that stays even if it rains. Like buttons. They shine. Sophie added. And they're not for wishing things to come. They're for thanking what already did. Ethan met Isabel's eyes. They both smiled. Go ahead, Ethan said. Tie one for us. The girls ran to the tree, laughter trailing behind them like ribbon. Ethan watched as they tied a blue button and a red one to the lowest branch. Then Lila whispered something to the trunk and kissed her fingers before pressing them gently against the bark. A prayer, maybe. Or just gratitude. Isabel rested her head on his shoulder. You ever think we'd get here? She asked. No, he admitted. You ever think we'd deserve it? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, maybe. It's not about deserving. Maybe it's just about staying long enough to grow. She took his hand. He held it tight. Behind them, the girls braided grass and sang something tuneless and sweet. Ahead of them, the wind whispered through the branches of the promise tree, not loud but steady, and all around them, peace. Not perfect, but real chosen. Later that afternoon, they hosted a small gathering. Neighbors arrived with pumpkin bread and blankets and too much cider. Sheriff Dalton carved wood near the fire pit. Mrs. Greeley brought quilt squares for the girls to sew. Even Tom Delaney sat on a hay bale and nodded approvingly at the porch swing he'd helped hang. The house was full of voices, not loud, not forced, just there. As the sun sank low, Isabel stood under the tree with Ethan beside her and the girls in front. Together they tied one last ribbon. White. Blank. Nothing written. Not because they had nothing left to say, but because they were already living the answer. That night, after everyone had gone and the yard had quieted, Ethan stepped outside one more time. The stars blinked high above the trees. The earth smelled like apples and wood smoke. He stood beneath the promise tree, hands in his pockets, and listened. There was no magic sound, no sign, just the rustle of ribbon, the breath of wind, the echo of laughter still tucked inside the walls. Isabel joined him barefoot in the grass. He didn't turn, just asked, soft as the air around them, "Do you think this lasts?" She slid her hand into his. "Nothing lasts," she said. "But we're still here." Ethan nodded, looked at the house, at the girls asleep inside, at the sky above, at the tree beside them, then back at her. "We don't have to promise forever," he whispered, "but we can choose to stay. Today." Isabel smiled. "Then let's stay." And they stood there, still, close, rooted, under the promise tree. Sometimes family isn't about who we're born to, but who stays when the storm passes. If this story touched your heart, let it live a little longer. Give it a like and subscribe to stay for the next one. There's always another quiet miracle waiting.